Hello everybody, I'm Rusty. I want to welcome you to Island Breeze Tropicals. So today we're going to learn how to trim bromeliads. So you know what? The sun is shining, the island breeze is blowing. I know it's time that you and I got growing. Come on, let's have some fun and let's trim up some bromeliads. So last week we looked at leaf senescence and dead leaves in bromeliads. What we're going to do today is we're going to find out how to trim those bromeliads, and we're going to be asking the questions: should we trim, where should we trim, and what should we trim it with? But before we go into should we trim the leaf or not and how do we do it, perhaps we ought to look at the utensils we're going to need in order to do that. I'm going to show you 3 examples. So I have some examples here of what you can trim your bromeliads with some caveats. Down at the bottom of the frame you can see there are 2 kinds of pruning shears here. These do a really good job and they are fairly safe. You can see a larger one and the smaller one you'll see me use, and it really works for close in work very well. The larger one, when you have larger leaves, that works pretty good, but the one that's on the left is a little too large to get down into some of the lower leaves. And you'll see that the small one, the yellow one that's on the right, does a really good job. It doesn't require a whole lot of effort, and its small size makes it so that you can get close in. And this gives you a better idea as to the architecture of it. And then you move on over to this one. This one is slightly bigger, but they both do a really good job and they're pretty safe. So here are a couple of cutting utensils that I am going to include with caveats. And the reason is that you have exposed blades on both of these, and that can make them a little dangerous if we're not careful when we are cutting, but they do a good job getting in there, especially on lower leaves. So actually it's a linoleum knife on the bottom that's fairly easy to keep sharp, and you can bring that in to the lower leaves. The upper one is a hooked utility blade. Now the hooked blade makes it pretty easy to get down to the base of the plant. But remember that both of these do require a little bit of skill, and certainly you want to be safe with them because these are exposed blades. And a good pair of stout heavy-duty gloves will help. You'll see that these are gauntlets, and that will protect your hand not only when you are cutting, but it'll also protect your wrist and forearms from some of the arming on some of your bromeliad leaves. So I recommend that you always have a nice pair of gloves, something that will protect your hands, and use the right cutting utensil for the job. And always take your time and pay attention to what we're doing, and you should never have a problem. So the first thing that we should figure out is, should we trim it all? So let me show you what I think can be trimmed, and also what maybe you shouldn't trim. So I have a couple of bromeliads here to show you. On the left hand side is a billbergia pyramidalis, and on the right hand side is a small aechmea blanchettiana. So we're going to start out with the pyramidalis first, and as you can see, the lower leaves are senescing just like they're supposed to. Now there are some spots on there. That's probably just a little bit of mechanical injury. Now further up the plant you can see that there is some spotting on the upper leaves. And on some of the leaves, there is also some sun bleaching. So even though this pyramidalis does have damage on some of the leaves, we're not going to be trimming all of them. For instance, these upper leaves, as you can see, they have that spotting that we just looked at. But that is not warranting of trimming this plant. And we move further down. And you can see this sun bleaching. Now, should we trim those leaves off? Well, here's my opinion. No, we shouldn't. And the reason is that the leaves are not damaged to a point where they cannot produce carbohydrate for the plant. We've talked about this numerous times. These leaves are solar collectors. This plant needs all of the leaves that it can get in order to get over this damage that I've shown you. But when it's on lower leaves, or there is necrotic or dead tissue, then yeah, we can trim those off. And let me move on over here, and you can see it a little bit better. And these lower leaves, first off, the plant isn't really going to need them because they're not getting enough sunlight, they're old, they're not going to produce food for the plant, so they can go. Okay, so we see that we have some leaves here on the pyramidalis. Some are really, really obvious and they need to come out. And really, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to try and reach around here and cut on the inside. And you just cut them off like that. Now, that will not harm the plant at all. Got this one down here. Now, you've got this one down here. And I'm going to try and get it in frame. And all you really have to do sometimes is peel these old senescent leaves. So sometimes all you have to do is pull these old senescent leaves out of the plant like this. Already starting to look better. We don't have a whole lot of dead stuff in there. Now this leaf right here, this has not started to senesce, and I think we ought to leave it. Okay, so we come around here, and these are always going to be judgment calls that you're going to have to make. But in general, look at where the leaf is on the plant. So there's always going to be judgment calls that you're going to have to make on your plant as to which leaves you want to take off. But in general, if you take a look, you can see that some of this is pretty obvious. Yes, the dead ones need to come off of there. But then we take a look at this leaf and this leaf. Well, these are really, really old leaves. You can see that they're on their way out. Let me see if I can get this into the frame. You can see that this is cupped. This is telling me that this particular leaf right here probably will not hurt the plant if it's gone. This one too. And we do initially the same thing. I'm going to take and remove this one down here because this leaf is not functioning very, very well. I'm going to turn this around here. And we're going to trim this one. What about this leaf right here? What should we do? Well, in my judgment, this leaf is not producing carbohydrate. The plant's not going to care if it loses it. There's one underneath of it. Take a look at that. Now this is advanced senescence in this leaf. So I'm going to cut this one off right like this so I can get to the other one. As you can see, and I know you've seen it in all of your bromeliads, they are in layers. And I am right-handed, so you will forgive my lack of dexterity here, and that's all you do, and you pull that off. You've got a little piece of stuff right there. And if you really want to trim it up a little bit more, then you can take and do that. Now, you can get as close as you want to. It depends on your own aesthetics. The plant is not going to know or care where you cut it. So I'm going to bring this around here, and we have another lower leaf. Here's one that's already senesced. See how easy it comes off? You don't even have to cut. So if you take a look at this leaf right here, you can see that this is getting to be in an advanced stage of senescence. It's ready to go, not a problem. And we'll cut this one out right now. And we just keep on going around the plant, and we're going to cut this one off. Okay, so here's another one of these judgment calls. This leaf has been bent, and actually you can see the malformation in the tissue there because of that bend. Now this leaf really is not going to produce food for the plant, and so taking it off I don't think is going to hurt this particular plant. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take this off here. And then the next leaf, you can see this one really needs to go. But remember, we are not taking off healthy leaves. So we have another judgment call. This leaf is totally bent. And you can see where the bend was because it started to become necrotic. So I would say that this particular leaf can come off, and we'll just cut it down here. I don't want to cut into the other leaves if I can. And just like that, that leaf is gone, and it's not going to hurt the plant. So I think the key here is that we don't want to take healthy leaves off of the plant, even if they are bleached or they have sun damage to them. Okay, so this is the Aechmea blanchettiana. This is a small plant. This is not an adult. But you can take a look right here and you can see that there are some leaf ends that are necrotic, that are dying back. You can see there is some leaf senescence. Again, we talked about that last week. Here you can get a better idea of some of the leaves that are at the very lower of the plant. Remember that those leaves are dying back because the plant is producing newer leaves, and it is going to shunt all of the resources away from these non-productive leaves. So this is the blanchettiana. Now you can see, take a look at this. This has already been trimmed previously. Now here's something I want to show you. I'm going to zoom into this thing, see if I can do it and not jerk it around. Take a look at the edges on this leaf. Again, this is a trim, and it's trimmed in the shape of the leaf so that it doesn't look too bad. But what I want you to see is right here, see this edge? Whenever we trim a leaf and leave it and then trim the outside of the leaf off back to healthy tissue, eventually there will always be that line that will show you that it was trimmed. In general, you're just not going to see it in daily life, but that is going to happen, and that's because when you take your scissors and you cut, what you're doing is you actually, as you're cutting, you're actually crushing cells, and that's what this is right here. So here's another leaf. This one's on the blanchettiana, and as you can see, this leaf has gone into total senescence. It's ready to go, and all we're going to do is bend this down to get some purchase here. Sorry if my hands are in the way. I'm working in back of the camera, and we're going to cut it around so that we can first see how far back we can take this, and we cut it like that. And as you can see, that's not all that pretty, so we can trim that up a little bit better. And again, I'm working backwards here, so I hope you'll forgive that. And all we're going to do is just trim a little bit more off of the base of that, so it's not so much of a cup on the remaining part of the leaf. And that still can be done a little bit better. We're not going to go into perfect today, but that leaf is out of there, and now it doesn't look so bad. Okay, so here's another judgment call. Now you can see that this leaf looks pretty good except for this necrotic area right here. Now remember, in the previous shot I showed you that this is a juvenile plant, so it doesn't have that many leaves. So what do we do? In my opinion, I would say leave this leaf until it's all ready to go. Yes, it is a lower leaf. Yes, it is going to go into senescence. But remember, we want this plant to grow. This is not going to make that much of a difference in the amount of photosynthate or carbohydrate that the plant makes. So I would leave this leaf. Now, sometimes leaves can have areas on the tips that will start to die back. Sometimes that can be because of sun damage and or drought stress. I apologize for the background and the glare. This is not the best shot, but what I'm going to do is show you what to do with this leaf. You should not take this leaf off. All you need to do is trim it like this. And you can also trim it up like that, and you can cut it so that the cut looks like the end of the leaf. Now there is that bit of necrosis right there, but remember, we want to leave as much as the leaf as we can, especially on a younger plant, so that it will be able to make food. And eventually this is going to have a heck of a lot more leaves, and this one is going to senesce, and then it can come off. Now this is another leaf that even more of the end has come off of. And I'm going to try and reach around. Now this is going to be a little tricky. I think you can see that this leaf has curled. So you have to be careful that you don't bend it in such a way that it breaks. And you trim it down like this. Sorry for my big hand there. And it's not the prettiest of cuts, but that's about the best we can do. And your plant, at least from a couple feet away, is not going to look all that terrible. So these are our two plants, and they have been trimmed, and they don't look as bad as they did before. They are not going to look perfect because there are going to be some areas, again, that we're just not going to mess with. We want the plants to outgrow some of the damage that they had, and they need all of the leaves that they can get in order to do that. So anyway, guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed learning how to trim your bromeliads. I'm sure you saw how easy it is. So no matter where you are, I hope your sun is shining. I hope you have an island breeze blowing. I know that you need to keep growing, have some fun. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.